Well, good morning. Today the inquiry will hear the evidence of Alan Paton. And before that happens, I wish to make a short statement in relation to his evidence. Ordinarily, witnesses give evidence to the inquiry in public, either sitting in the hearing room or remotely by live television link. Their evidence is live streamed on the inquiry's YouTube channel, and the transcript of the evidence is published on the website. With the exception of Alan Paton, each of the officers who attended at Hayfield Road on 3 May 2015 has given evidence in person in an open hearing in the hearing room. In the case of Mr. Paton, at an earlier stage, I ordered that his evidence should be taken using special measures, namely, that his evidence should be recorded in a closed hearing, that he should be accompanied by an appropriate adult, and that the recording should subsequently be played in public. The closed hearing took place in the hearing room on Monday the 13th of June 2022. The hearing was attended by the chair, the assessors, counsel to the inquiry, and such inquiry staff as were necessary to conduct the recording. Mr. Paton's wife and his legal representatives were also in attendance. The recording of his evidence will be played today. I permitted the taking of the evidence of Mr. Paton in this way because I was satisfied on the basis of medical reports that Mr. Paton suffers from mental illness. I received a report and a supplementary report prepared by a consultant forensic psychiatrist. Having considered these, I was satisfied, first, that if I required Mr. Paton to give evidence in person or by live television link, there was a real risk that he would be unable to give evidence at all, leading to the result that the inquiry and the members of the families of Sheku would be deprived altogether of hearing his important evidence. Second, I was satisfied that requiring Mr. Paton to give evidence in person or by live television link would be likely to cause harm by having an additional adverse effect on his mental health. I concluded, therefore, that the surest and safest way to obtain his evidence for the inquiry and to avoid causing further harm to his mental health was to record his evidence in the manner that I have described. In coming to this conclusion, I was very much aware that the families of Sheku have been waiting for over 7 years for the opportunity to see and hear for themselves what this important witness has to say. While I recognize that the pre-recorded evidence falls short of what they would have wished, the risk that they might not have heard his evidence at all has been avoided, and they and the public will at least hear the recorded evidence of Mr. Paton today. When the recording is being played, listeners will notice that at certain parts the audio has been edited out. This occurs in that part of his evidence in which he has been examined about complaints against him made by members of the public. The editing has been carried out where he has either named certain persons whom it is not appropriate or necessary to identify, or has given evidence that might lead to the identification of such persons. I am satisfied that the parts that have been edited out are not necessary for the inquiry to fulfill its terms of reference. And after the recording has been played, I shall invite oral applications under Rule 9. In the event that I grant any such applications, I shall constitute a further closed hearing. Any further permitted examination will be conducted by counsel to the inquiry, and the recording will be played in public later. We're now in a position to begin the playing of the recorded evidence. Good morning, Mr. Paton.
Morning.
You're going to be asked questions by Ms. Graham, whom you've met already. If you want a break at any time, just let me know and I'll happily give you a break. Can you now say the words of the affirmation after me? I solemnly, sincerely and truly
I solemnly, sincerely and truly
declare and affirm
declare and affirm
that I will tell the truth,
that I will tell the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Ms. Graham.
Thank you. Good morning again, Mr. Paton. You're Alan Paton. What age are you?
48.
And in 2015 you had 14 years police service.
Yeah.
And you were a police constable.
Yep.
And we have all your contact details, so I'm not going to ask you to say what those are. And is it correct to say that you're now retired from the police service? Could I ask you, first of all, to look at a statement you gave to Perk 262? And it's up on the screen now, you'll see, and it's got your name. And then if we scroll down the page slightly, you'll see it was given on the 4th of May 2015 at 11:15 in the morning. And that was to Investigating Officer Alex Maguire in the presence of Ricky Casey. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Now, you should also have a copy of that in front of you in the black folder. Now, can I just confirm something about the date? It says on this typed version that the date and time you gave it was the 4th of May 2015. But my understanding is that all of the police officers gave statements on the 4th of June 2015. Do you remember if you gave your statement to Perk on the same day as all the other officers?
Certainly I was in the 4th of May.
Right. Well, so if we've heard that everyone else gave their statements on the 4th of June, is that more likely to be correct?
There or thereabouts, aye.
Thank you. And am I right in saying that you were allowed, that was maybe read over to you, or you read over this statement before you confirmed you were happy with it?
Yeah.
Do you remember which it was? No. Do you remember if you signed it?
I think so.
Yeah. And is it fair to say that you were doing your best on, when you gave this statement to Perk, to be giving them the true and accurate record of the events of the 3rd of May 2015?
Yeah.
Thank you. And we've heard other officers say that the events of the 3rd of May were much fresher in their minds when they gave statements to Perk. Is that the same position for you
Yes.
Thank you. So if there's any difference between what you're able to tell us today and what you told Perk when you spoke to them to give this statement, could you help the chair? Should he prefer this statement if there's any difference?
More than likely.
More than likely. Okay. Well, I do intend to go through this with you, so if there's any difference you don't agree with, you can let us know. And then, were you also asked to look at a map, COPFS 98, and mark up sort of who was involved, and you should have a copy of that in your black folder as well. Is that the map that you gave to Perk? Thank you. And then more recently, where you sent a lot of questions by the inquiry team, and you responded to those questions, and I'm going to call this your inquiry statement. It's a document that was prepared by you in conjunction with your lawyers, and where you answer all the questions that the inquiry team sent you. Did you see that there?
Yeah.
Do you recognise that as your statement?
Yeah.
Thanks. And can we look at the final paragraph, please? Not at the end of the document. That's it. Thank you. And do you see it's a short page just before the appendix. I think you have that. And the second paragraph says, I believe the facts stated in this witness statement are true. I understand that this statement may form part of the evidence before the inquiry and be published on the inquiry's website. And you understand that. And then my copy says it was signed by you on the 5th of May this year. I don't know if your copy has the actual signature on it. I don't have any copy. Do you remember if you signed this statement?
I believe so.
Yeah. But regardless of whether it's signed or not, are you happy that this statement is true and you know that it might form part of the evidence that the chair considers and it might be published on the website?
Yeah.
Thank you. Now, on the 11th of May, Brian McConaughey, QC, your lawyer, your QC, made a statement on your behalf. And in that he said you were hoping that with your assistance and cooperation that the chair will discover the truth about what happened. And does that remain the position today?
Yeah.
Thank you. And then he also said in his opening statement that the events have had a significant impact on you and your family, and he told us that you have PTSD. And I just want to say thank you for attending today, but if you, as the chair said to you at the outset, if you feel you need a break, please let me know and I can help ask the chair for a break. So you've got your hard copies of everything in front of you. If you want to refer to that at any time, just let me know. And if I don't have the right bit on the screen, if you tell me what page it is, then I can ask for that to be put on the screen so we can see it.
Okay.
And in addition, you'll also see a spreadsheet just to your left. And I know that you've watched other evidence that we've taken in the inquiry, so you should be reasonably familiar with what it shows. But you'll see on the left hand side it's got timings in the 24-hour clock, and then to the left of centre you've got transcripts of airwaves transmissions that were made by officers, and just to the right of centre we've got a little short description of what is said to be on the CCTV. Now, if you've watched evidence, you'll have seen some of that on the TV channel as we've gone through it. And I'll refer you to that, Mr. Paton, but also you can look through that at any time if you wish. You happy with that?
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to take my lead today from some of the comments that your QC gave in his opening statement. He said there were about 5 areas where you had involvement on the day. So I'm going to take my lead from him and ask you about those 5 areas. And the first thing I want to talk to you about today is the initial contact that you had. So let's start by looking at your original statement, the one you gave to Perk. And if we could look at page 2 of that statement. Thank you. And I'm going to look at paragraph 2. I'm just going to ask you a quick question about this page. You say you've previously submitted a statement to John Sallins from Professor Watson. We've heard that Peter Watson is a solicitor who represents SPF. And he's in a company called PBW Law. And you said, I don't have a hard copy, but I do have an electronic copy, which I've agreed to submit electronically by email to Investigator Maguire. And I've signed the documentary production backing sheet. You'll see that we don't have a copy of that in the folder. We don't have a copy in the inquiry. Would you be willing to give us a copy of that statement?
I don't have a copy of the statement.
Oh, you don't?
No.
Who has it?
I don't know who does have it.
All right, okay. Well, that's maybe something that we can explore with your solicitors. Thank you. Let's look at page 4 then, paragraph 1. And you say here, I think it took me about 1 minute to 2 minutes to arrive at Hayfield Road. When I arrived, I came up Henry Road and turned right at Gallagher's Public House into Hayfield Road. And upon entering Hayfield Road, I was the first police vehicle on the scene. Do you see that at the top of the page? And it's on the screen as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you travelled to Hayfield Road and you're the first vehicle on the scene, police vehicle. I'm going to ask you to look at evidence video timeline. And you'll see, just for your own use, if you look at page 3 of the spreadsheet, now, I'm going to be asking Miss Wildgoose to play some of this footage, and I know you'll have seen this already, but you see on page 3 of the spreadsheet, first of all, in the left-hand column, the timings, 7:20:13, and there's a reference to ACR, Area Control Room Inspector Stewart, and then a transmission that he made. Inspector Stewart, Area Control Room to the set, attending. I'm monitoring this obviously from a ARV perspective. If you get sightings of the male, you need to make an initial assessment yourself and feedback through straight away, and I'll listen out on the channel. And then you'll see on the right hand side of that column, it says large marked police van arrives from south on Henry Road and turns right at the roundabout into Hayfield Road. You got that page? And below that column, again on the CCTV column, dark coloured car enters roundabout from Henry Road, turns right, continues south on Henry Road, police van stops on Hayfield Road within field of vision of CCTV. So I'm going to ask Miss Wildgoose to play about 30 seconds of the footage on the screen. You'll see the time, real-time clock at the top left says 7:20:11, And then at the bottom there's CCTV footage, and I'll ask her to play until 7:20 and 42 seconds.
Inspector Stewart, area control room to the set attending. I'm monitoring this obviously from an ARV perspective. If you get sightings of the male, you need to make an initial assessment yourself and feedback to me straight away, and I'll listen out on the channel.
Control for Bravo, do we have a description? I missed it. It's described as male, black, well built, 6 foot tall width.
Thank you very much. So we've heard that the real-time clock that's shown is to 1 second accuracy. And I'd like to go through, and it might be useful to use page 3 of the spreadsheet as we do that. And I'd like to explore with you what was happening at that point of as we've watched. So if we look at 7:20:13 first of all, and did you hear the transmission from Area Control Room Inspector Stewart on your radio that day?
Can't recall.
Looking at it now, what's your understanding of that message?
It's a message that's been passed by him with the best intention, but it's completely unclear what he's saying.
Right. In what way is it unclear?
Monitoring it from an ARV perspective doesn't really give much away. We were needing to know then, was an ARV coming or was it not?
Right. So what type of information would you have liked to be clear and to provide that clarity?
Was an ARV coming or is it not? If it is, where's it coming from? ETA, likewise with a dog, if you're saying information.
So just clearer estimate of the time it would take perhaps to arrive.
Yep.
And what was your understanding of the words initial assessment?
I didn't hear the words initial assessment. I can't recall any of that.
Right.
I think I was actually, if not getting out of the van, already out of the van by the time the message ended.
And we've heard that people can hear messages from their radio.
Yeah.
Is that not something that you were able to hear that day?
Not when you're in the heat of the situation.
And is that an explanation why you didn't hear that message? Yeah. Thank you. Looking at it now, we've heard some evidence about an initial assessment being a risk assessment and feedback being a call to ACR to give them information about what was happening at the scene. Is that your understanding, that an initial assessment is a risk assessment effectively?
Yeah.
And feedback would be to put a message, a transmission onto your radio.
Yeah.
With information about what was happening.
Mm-hmm.
And we've also heard some evidence that really is just reinforcing to officers what they know anyway, that they should do a risk assessment, they should feedback. Do you agree with that?
Yeah.
And we've heard, you've just looked at the CCTV, we've heard from PC Walker that was your transit van arriving at Hayfield Road. Did you also recognise that van?
Yeah.
And we've heard from PC Walker that he stopped the van. He was driving, but he stopped the van at the bus stop, and that's where the van is shown on the CCTV. Do you agree with that?
Yeah.
And I wonder if we could look at some images, please, still images, and I'll use these as I go through the events. So we've got image 4 and we've got image 5. Image 5 might be quite useful at this stage. And we see on this image, these are images prepared by a company called Advanced Laser Imaging, or ALI. You'll see the transit van on the right-hand side is at the bus stop area. And that's what PC Walker said was your van. Do you see that one?
Mm-hmm.
And the bus stop is just slightly to the right of the image that we see here. And you can see the yellow markings on the road. When you arrived in the van with PC Walker, can you demonstrate from this image where Mr. Bio was when you first saw him? Now, you'll probably have seen on some of the previous footage, Mr. Paton, that you can touch the screen and a red circle will appear. And so if you are able to touch the screen and put a red circle, that would be very helpful. And if this image doesn't show the area, we can find another image.
Doesn't show the area.
Right, let's find another image. We will... Let's use image 8, please. So there's no cars or vehicles, police vehicles on this image, and it's an bird's eye view, but image 8 shows the full bus stop area and the shelter, the bus shelter. And to the left of this is the roundabout with Henry Road. Would you be able to use this image to show where Mr. Bio was when you first saw him?
Very roughly, because the van's not there to gauge distance, but very roughly I put there.
So you've pointed and created a red circle on the actual roadway near to the far right of the bus stop as we look at it on this image.
Aye.
So was Mr. Bio on the roadway at that time?
I believe so.
And what direction was he facing?
Facing towards Gallagher's roundabout.
We've heard that the roundabout on the left-hand side, there's a pub nearby called Gallagher's Pub. Is that what you're referring to? And what was he doing when you first saw him?
Briskly walking.
When you say briskly, what do you mean?
Briskly.
And that was in the direction of the roundabout.
No, I wouldn't say it was in the direction of the roundabout. I would say it was in the direction of Hendry Road.
All right. So
I would say if it was direction of the roundabout would be slightly further down.
okay. You might have seen people drawing lines. Let's Alan, ask if we can get the line function, and I'll get you to draw a line which will provide an arrow showing the correct direction. And I think you have to move the line away from the red circle for it to work properly. That's it. So thank you. So number 2 is the direction in which Mr. Bio was driving.
Walking.
Walking. And as the transit van approached, where was he when the transit van arrived at the bus stop and stopped?
6 feet in front of the transit van.
Can you point with a circle onto the image? Thank Thank you. And then if we can go back to image 4, just so I can be clear, this is the one that shows the transit van in position. Or let's look at 5, please. So that's the transit van in position, which, in relation to that van in that position, where was Mr. Byle when the transit van stopped?
A lot further to the right hand side. Off the screen.
Of the screen. How far were you from Mr. Byle when the transit van stopped in the bus stop?
Okay. 25 feet.
When you first saw him, what was the first thing that went through your mind?
That's our man.
And what made you think that?
Description of what he was wearing. Still at the relatively same locus as described by numerous witnesses. Black.
And what was he wearing?
T-shirt and jeans.
What colour was the t-shirt?
White or grey.
Did you consider anything at that time about terrorism?
Yes.
What?
As with every knife call, not just this one, as with every knife call, I consider terrorism until I get further information to rule it in or rule out.
Right. And why do you do that with every knife call?
Because throughout the station, at every turn, there's terror posters highlighting the terrorist level. And we'd also, I don't know if you've got that there, there was a memo came out by Rory Nicholson that was highlighting the terrorist level, what we were to do about it, and making reference to Lee Rigby.
And you may have seen me or that being referred to in a previous hearing.
Yeah.
And what was the terrorist level at that time in May 2015, as far as you remember?
Severe.
Would you have had the same concerns about terrorism if Mr. Byle had been white?
Of course I would. Terrorists are not just white. They're not just black, should I say.
Was it of concern to you at that time, on the 3rd of May 2015, that all units had been sent to attend Hayfield Road?
Was it of concern?
Yes.
No, that's what I'd come to expect.
Right. Was that a normal response for all knife incidents?
Not just all knife incidents, all incidents of a threatening sort of behaviour or calls that could quite easily get out of hand or whatever, but certainly if a weapon, not just a knife, if a weapon's mentioned, then it's a case of all units, if you can do, drop everything and go.
Was it of concern to you that you've obviously got the terrorist, the threat level in your mind?
Yep.
Was it of concern that you didn't understand there to be any support from an ARV on its way, or a dog unit?
First things first, needed to protect the public. This was a large guy using, not just carrying, but using a knife on innocent members of the public and their property, arguably cars. This needed drawn to a conclusion as soon as possible, without the tendency of an ARV or a dog, but more so an ARV, then somebody had to deal with it. If it hadn't been dealt with, it could have gone completely pear-shaped.
What do you mean by completely pear-shaped?
Well, I'm sure we'll go on to where we were walking, but it's my firm belief that had I not intervened and taken that sort of early intervention, he was walking back to where the knife was, and who knows what could have happened if he had picked it up and started using it then.
So you could.
Let's face it, he was on a mission to try. His sole purpose of going on the streets with a knife was to try and find Saeed Zahid, probably with the intention of killing him.
Okay. Can I ask you to focus on what was in your mind on the 3rd of May? Am I right in thinking you didn't know anything about Saeed Zahid when you got out the van on the 3rd of May 2015?
Correct, I know that now though.
You know it now because I think you've watched the evidence. But on the day itself, you didn't know anything about Saeed Zahid.
No.
And could you see Mr. Bio with a knife when you got out the van?
No.
So what on the 3rd of May 2015, if anything, did you know about the knife?
Just from the descriptions.
And when you say the descriptions, what do you mean by that?
I'm sure the radio transmissions made mention of a big knife or words to that effect.
So you had information from the airwaves transmissions, but since then you've obviously listened to the evidence of this inquiry.
Correct.
Fair to say you have a lot more information now than you maybe did on the 3rd of May.
So.
Okay. So when you said a moment ago he was walking back to where the knife was, is that your impression from having listened to the evidence?
No.
So why did you say he was walking back to where the knife was?
Because I knew where the knife was recovered and I knew the direction he was walking in the close proximity. It was only 20 feet.
But on the 3rd of May, when the van arrives and you get out the transit van, you didn't know a knife was recovered.
No, not at that stage, no.
Right. I'd quite like, if we can, to focus on what you knew at the time that you got out the van, rather than think about things that you learned later. So your immediate impressions and your state of knowledge at that time. Right. We can come back to the other things later, perhaps.
Yeah.
So on the 3rd of May 2015, you get out the van. You've described seeing Mr. Bio and where he was, and you've told us you had heard airwaves transmissions about a man. You think this is the man you see on Hayfield Road is the man that you've been hearing the airwaves transmissions about. So, can I ask you first of all, was there a reason on that day why you didn't sit in the van and observe Mr. Bio rather than getting out straight away?
Because we didn't know if he had a knife or if he didn't have a knife, and it needed to be drawn to some sort of control, some sort of conclusion, ASAP.
What was Mr. Bio doing that, what if anything was he doing that would have caused you concern in relation to the knife?
He could have taken the knife out of a waistband, sock, anywhere.
So,
People could have been walking the streets. I didn't know who was behind me on the wee path. Cars were going past. People could have come out of a house. As I say, it was just too big a risk to sit back and contain. Perhaps that's what you would get away with at other incidents, which I have done in my previous service. But this situation was so pressing to get control, protect the public, protect other officers, protect Bayou, that I felt it was the right decision to do, and I still do 100% feel it was the right decision to do.
we've heard some evidence about Hayfield Road, the sort of area it is. Did you know Hayfield Road
Yes, I
that day?
grew up just across the road from it.
Right. And we've heard that there's hospitals in the area
Yes.
and houses and churches. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
What was it? You said it was so pressing. What was it about that situation that made it pressing?
The fact that it had been corroborated that he had been using the knife.
And when you say corroborated, what do you mean?
More than one person speaking to the same, giving an element of credibility to what they're saying.
So we've heard some evidence already that there were multiple calls coming in. Is that what you mean? There was more than one call
Yeah.
coming in from different sources.
Yep.
And we've heard some evidence from officers saying that's what allowed them to rule out the idea it was a hoax call. Was that the same for you?
To be honest, I didn't really think it was a hoax call. But you're right, more than one person phoning in tends to rule out that it was a hoax call.
And you've talked about your desire to protect the public. Tell us a little bit about that.
In terms of what?
What were you concerned about in terms of the public?
That he stabbed one of them.
We've also heard that there weren't really any members of the public around. So what was your concern at that stage that he might stab someone?
Well, you've got houses all along one side. Might not have been any members of the public at that moment in time, but it only takes 10 seconds and then you've got a family of 5 walking out the front door.
Okay.
There's also the path between Hayfield Road and Henry Road. Shrubs and such, like, who knows, there could have been somebody walking past that. The locus wasn't protected for cars going past. Could have, as has been suggested, perhaps tried a car door, stabbed somebody in a car, stabbed somebody through a window of a car.
Okay. And then you've also mentioned protection to officers. So what were your concerns about officers' safety?
Well, a knife is always dangerous, especially when it's somebody that's high on flakka, that's got possession of the knife. If he's prepared to use it on other members of the public in their cars, then he would be prepared to use it on police officers. I was also aware that there was a female officer going to Locus. I know 2 ultimately went, but at first I knew there was a female officer going, Nicole Short. There was a strong rumour going about in Kirkcaldy Police Station that a female officer was going to get injured by a lone wolf.
Right. So you were aware that Nicole Short was going, female officer, and you said, again, focusing on the 3rd of May, you were aware of a strong rumour that a female officer was going to be injured by a lone wolf.
Yes.
What do you mean by that? Where had you heard this rumour?
It was common knowledge about Kirkcaldy Police Station.
Right.
I raised it, being the senior sort of member on the team, I raised it with Inspector Stephen Kay at muster, asking if he could get in touch with the intelligence department and also perhaps special branch to find out if there was anything in it, and nothing came back. I raised it only days before this.
Right. So this was a Sunday. Would it have been the week prior that you raised this with Inspector Kay?
I believe so.
And we've heard about a muster in the morning from Acting Police Sergeant Maxwell, that there was a sort of gathering of the officers in the response team.
Yeah.
So is this something that they would have known about? Did you raise it in front of other officers in the team?
Yeah.
You didn't raise it with Sergeant Maxwell?
If he was covering on that day, bearing in mind he was just an acting sergeant, but the sergeant, if that was him, would have been present as well.
Right. But it was raised by you with Inspector Kay anyway.
Yeah.
We've heard he was the sort of senior officer
Yeah.
in Kirkcaldy, is that correct?
Yeah.
And you asked him to get in touch with the intelligence department. Who are they? Are they in Kirkcaldy or are they somewhere else?
They're based up at headquarters in Glenrothes, as far as I was aware, but with everything being centralised, with Police Scotland, who knows where they're based.
We have heard that at that time, headquarters were in Glenrothes for Fife Police. Is that correct?
Yes, I think so.
And then Special Branch, is that they're more national rather than Fife-based, presumably, are they?
Aye, that's deal with more sort of sensitive stuff and political stuff and things like that.
How long after you heard this rumour did you speak to Inspector Kay at a muster?
Not long. I couldn't give you an idea of the date, but it's not long.
Was it the same day or a few days, or can you give us any indication?
No, I couldn't.
No. Who told you about this rumour?
It was just common knowledge.
Was it? So other officers knew about it in Kirkcaldy Police Office?
Yeah, I think it was. I think it sort of came at the same time that we were told to travel to and from work in plain clothes. Obviously, I could be wrong there. That could just be in relation to the severe terrorist threat level, but it kind of came at about the same sort of time as the terrorist level was getting really pushed, to be aware.
Do you remember when that happened?
No, I don't know. No.
Okay. We might have heard evidence that an officer checked later and couldn't find anything to do with a threat against a female. You think that's just convenient?
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Don't know.
Okay. Right. So you also said earlier when you were talking about Mr. Bio and Hayfield Road, someone high on flakka. What does that mean?
What?
You used the words high on flakka. Someone high on flakka could go for a knife, take it out of their waistband or such like.
Well, you've only got to Google.
Yeah. Do you know what flakka is?
Yeah.
What is it?
It's a synthetic drug that sends folk not quite right.
And at the time when you saw Mr. Bio in Hayfield Road,
Aye.
were you aware that he was high on flakka, or is this information that's
I wasn't
come
aware
to
he
you?
was high on flakka, but I was aware he was high on something.
Right. How were you aware he was high on
his
something?
eyes were bulging at his head.
Right. So his eyes were bulging out of his head. And anything else you noticed about his eyes, or any other things you noticed?
Well, quite often on a lot of these synthetic drugs, you don't feel temperature like how you should.
Oh.
And it was pissing down with rain and blowing a gale. He's wearing a wee t-shirt.
So the fact he's in a short-sleeved T-shirt was an indicator to you as well as his eyes.
It could be, aye.
You've described or told us about arriving in the van. When did you first notice his eyes?
When I first saw him.
When you first saw him. As soon as you saw that and saw his eyes bulging out of his head, what did you think about the situation?
I still thought this situation needs to be taken control of, firmly taken control of as soon as possible. And the fact that he didn't have the knife in his hands, I could see his hands, I thought, I've got to take my opportunity, grasp this opportunity, confront him, and try and engage in conversation with him.
Right. You say you could see his hands. What could you see? Tell us, describe what you could see of his hands. How was he holding his hands?
Palms of his hands, like that.
Could you hold that up? Because the chair, there's a screen in front of you, right? So you're holding up your hands palm out. So at that time you could see he wasn't holding a knife.
Yeah.
And you've said that you would engage in conversation with him. What does that mean?
Give him a firm command. I mean, it wasn't a situation for asking him for his tea last night. It was a situation for taking control, and I gave him a firm command to stop,
Right.
pointing at the ground, and said the word to the effect to get down on the ground.
And so you pointed to the ground. Tell me what you were doing with your hands. You've said you pointed to the ground. Left
Get
hand.
down on the ground, spray in my right hand.
So you had your
My spray comes to there, to there.
right. So your spray was on your left hand of your chest.
I wore a different vest to the majority of guys. I didn't wear a utility belt, so my spray was here. My cuffs were... I think my cuffs were there. My baton was there.
So you're saying your baton and you're pointing to your left side.
I think so, aye.
And your cuffs were to your right hand side.
Right side, aye. I can't remember exactly where they were, but my spray was here.
Right. So we have heard one or two people mention you had a special vest that you wore. So you didn't wear a utility belt at all.
No.
And what was it about your vest that made it unique? Or different to others? We've heard about yellow high-vis vests over body armour. What was it about your vest that made it look different?
It was kind of like a string vest. I got mine way before everybody else got the over vests. And it was basically, I had back surgery, and it was to dispel the forces caused on your hips whilst wearing a utility belt.
So did your vest, I think you said, allowed you to keep your equipment but in different positions from other officers?
Yeah, it was still a police issue vest.
And you had your spray in your right hand, you said. When did you take your spray out so that you had it in your right hand?
Once I was out of the van.
And when in relation to the commands did you have your spray in your hand? Was it before or after?
Couldn't be certain.
Okay. So you've told us you wanted to give firm commands. Can you tell us what the commands were? Do you remember what you said? What the first thing you said was?
Stop. get down on the ground.
What was the reaction to that from Mr. Byle?
0.
No change in behaviour at all?
Just kept walking towards me.
Did he look at you?
Yes.
Did he say anything at all?
Not a thing.
When he looked at you, what could you see?
Again, he's bulging eyes and sort of staring through me, if you like. I mean, he's fully aware of a police van coming around the corner at speed, stopping in front of him. 2 police officers getting out, you know, giving him instructions, and he's still continuing to ignore everything.
What made you realise he was fully aware of the van and the 2 police officers?
Well, you'd have to be blind, not to.
And after he looked at you, what did he do?
He just continued to walk towards me.
So was he already walking towards you when
Yeah.
you got out the van?
Yeah.
So he didn't actually move or divert away from you or anything like
No.
that? And after you gave the command, he looked at you and he carried on walking.
Mhm.
What did you do?
Emphasised my spray with a straight arm, that, you know, there was no question at all that he saw it. He didn't see it. Maybe before, my spray could have maybe been in a lower hold, but directly towards him, pointing down on the ground, and I says, "Get yourself down on the fucking ground." He just kept walking towards me at the same time as I'm walking back.
So he's walking towards the same direction that he was walking in before?
Yeah.
No deviation from that?
No.
And any other reaction from him?
No. No reaction whatsoever.
What did you do?
Sprayed him.
How far were you away from him at that time?
12 feet.
Was this CS spray or Pava spray?
CS.
What happened after you discharged your spray?
Some of it hit him. Some of it, the majority of it, just got caught by the wind, about turned, and when CS gets distinguished, extinguished, I say, it goes out, and it's kind of, it's liquid form, isn't it? But it's like that silly string that you get, and it sort of went out, hit him, and then curled back round in the wind and came back and hit me.
Can you look again at this image on the screen, 5, and tell us, where were you when you discharged your spray?
About there.
That's number 1. And where was Mr. Byle? And after you discharged the spray and it hit you, what reaction did you have to that?
I tried to keep my eyes open as long as I could, but
How long was that?
realistically it's probably 5 seconds or something like that. Couldn't keep my eyes open any longer than that, so I just went to the back corner of the van and curled up.
So point to where, on image 5, point to where you went to and curled up. So that's the rear off. If we remove 4, please, Miss Wildgoose, and we'll see image 3. That looks like you've put image red circle 3 at the rear passenger side of that transit van. Is that right?
Rear back corner, right?
Rear back corner. Which direction were you facing?
My head was towards the sort of where the wee number plate on it is.
So facing the rear of the transit van. And what position were you in at that time?
Like that.
Right. And you told us that some of your spray hit Mr. Bio. What reaction, if any, did it have on him?
He just wiped off his face like it was water and smiled.
And can you show us how he wiped it off his face? Now, during that time, before the spray has affected your eyes, can you tell us where was PC Walker?
At the front of the van.
We've heard he was driving and got out the driver's seat. And do you recollect him being at the front of the van? Did he move from there prior to you discharging your spray?
Probably came a bit further round the front of the van towards the passenger side.
Front passenger side.
Yeah.
And, well, I shouldn't say that. You had been at the front passenger side. Was he at the front passenger side, or was he further along the van by the time you discharged your spray?
I think he was at the front passenger side.
What direction was he facing?
Towards Bayou.
What did PC Walker do?
He sprayed his Pava spray
Was that before or after you?
after.
So after you've discharged your spray and your eyes are still open for about 5 seconds, could you see what PC Walker did at that point?
Say that again, sorry?
So you've told us how you discharged your spray and your eyes were open for about 5 seconds, you thought?
Yeah.
And during that period of time, was that when you saw PC Walker discharge his spray?
Can't be sure. Round about that time, but I can't be sure.
What reaction did Mr. Bio have?
What did we get hit by Pava? Nothing.
Did it hit him?
Yep.
Where did it hit him?
In his face.
Had he turned round towards PC Walker by this time?
Possibly.
Do you have a clear recollection of that? So, did you hear anything from PC Walker?
No, I don't think so.
Did you hear anything from Mr. Bio?
Never heard anything from Mr. Bayou throughout the entire incident.
How long did you remain at the rear of the transit van?
Felt to me like maybe 15-20 seconds.
What was going through your mind at that time?
I thought I was going to die at that stage. I had visions, the Lee Rugby incident, just blood everywhere. I thought I was curled up, waiting for something to come down in the back of my neck or something to get stabbed in my neck. I genuinely thought I was a goner.
From that position, could you see where Mr. Bio was?
No,
Could you see where PC Walker was?
no.
So you remain in that position for perhaps 15 seconds. What's the first thing then that you notice that changes? You've talked about being in that position at the rear of the transit van. What happened after that?
I heard Nicole screaming.
Could you tell where her screaming came from?
Behind me. ish.
Did you have any impression at the time where behind you, how far away she was?
No, I was disorientated, completely and utterly disorientated with the CS spray.
What, when you say you heard her screaming, what was it you heard her scream?
Just screams, just a scream.
What did you do?
The effects of CS spray were I certainly thought at the time were starting to wear off, but just turned around and saw her on the ground. She was trying to get up onto her feet, but her legs were like rubber. She just kept falling back down. So I went across and picked her up by the lapels of her stab vest, and just told her to go back to the van, sit in the van.
So when you turned round, can you, using image 5, give an indication of where she was when you saw her on the ground?
Very, very loosely.
Thank you.
About there.
How far away was she from you?
15, 20 feet.
And you've said her legs were like jelly.
Yep.
Describe, what position was she in when you saw her?
Can't be certain.
And you've said she was trying to get up, is that
Yeah.
right? How was she trying to get up?
Well, I'm not what to guess, but
No.
to get up, I would suggest that you were sort of on your knees before you went up to your feet. And it was sort of at the stage of going from being on our knees to going on our feet that her legs were giving way.
And is that how you saw her when you first turned round?
Yeah.
She was trying to get up
Yeah.
from that position. And you've described pulling her up. Tell us how you did that.
Just grabbed the lapels of her vest and lifted her up.
Was that at the front of
Yeah.
PC Short?
Yeah.
And you've said you told her to go to the van?
Mm-hmm.
Was that the transit van that was behind you?
Yeah.
How long did that take you, would you say?
15 seconds most.
Once you dealt with PC Short, what could you see?
I could see something going on, which we now know is a sort of restraint stage.
Where was that happening? We'll get another picture on the screen.
Right there. Or look up a wee bit.
Okay. I could show you image 8 even, that might... There we go. So that's a bird's eye view of a wider area of Hayfield Road. Can you point out where?
I think about here somewhere. Oh no. Maybe about there somewhere.
All right, thank you. Right. So you see that happening further down Hayfield Road, closer to the roundabout than you were.
Yeah.
Can you tell me, where was PC Walker?
I don't know. I didn't know who was all involved in that stramash. I don't know.
Okay. And is that the word that you would use to describe what was happening during the restraint? A stramash?
Yeah.
We may have heard evidence about PC Walker being at the van at one point. Do you have any recollection of PC Walker being at the transit van with you?
That's what I mentioned earlier on. No recollection of whatsoever, but disorientated through the contamination of CS and PAVA.
Okay, thank you. So thinking about the Stramash, what was your first reaction when you saw that further down Hayfield Road?
To go and assist.
And how did you do that?
I just went across it.
And what was the first thing that you saw when you went across?
I can't remember.
What was the first thing you did when you went across?
Tried to kneel down, I believed, on the left hand side of Bayou.
Right.
Having watched the inquiry, it might have been the right hand side, but I certainly felt it was the left hand side, and tried to get control of one of his arms.
How was Mr. Bio lying at the time when you went over?
My perception was that he was on his back at all times. Bearing in mind that I'm disorientated and his eyes are streaming, no thinking straight.
So you could be wrong about that,
Certainly, I think I am wrong.
having watched all the other
Yeah.
evidence. But when you say you went over to help, so you've gone down, what did you actually do in relation to Mr. Bio, regardless of which side you were on?
Tried to get hold of his right arm to get control for somebody to put a cuff on.
So it was control of his right arm. Are you sure about the right arm?
Left arm,
Or his left arm? So his left arm, and where was his left arm in relation to you? Was it to your left or was it to your right, or?
down towards my left knee.
Beside your left knee?
Yeah,
And
but it was obviously dynamic, so it was getting moved all over the place.
is it fair to say that you were towards Mr. Bio's head area
Yeah,
rather than his leg area?
definitely. Yeah,
So looking at that image there, were you closer to the hedge on the south of Hayfield Road or further away? In terms of your position, were you to the south or to the north?
to the south.
To the south.
Right.
And now, what is it you did in relation to his left arm to try and get control at that stage?
There was a baton lying nearby. It wasn't my baton. I can't remember if I extended it or if it was extended, but I put the baton across his left bicep, thinking if I can control his upper arm, then he can't use his lower arm to get hold of any knife.
Right.
And it might also make it easier for handcuffs to be put on.
So at that time, you still didn't know where the knife was?
No.
And you've said a baton nearby. Do you remember anything about the baton?
Yeah. My baton was kind of smooth rubber. This one had lines on it, sort of like veins, if you like, grooves.
We've actually got 2 demonstration batons, and they are different, and I wonder if you'd look at both of them for me and tell me if you see the sort of model that you picked up.
I don't think it was either of these. I've never seen a baton where a tip on it like that before, but it was ribbed like that, whereas my one is smooth like that.
Right. Could you hold them up so that the chair can see? So there's one in your left hand which is smooth, one in your...
That's a smooth one.
And that's what your baton was
That's my
like.
baton, but I gave that to Craig.
Right. And then the other one is more, it's got ridges or ribs or something.
Ribbed, aye.
Yeah, ribbed. So it was more like that, but not exactly the same.
I don't think so. I've never seen a baton with this big blob on the top of it before.
Right, okay, thank you. So where was your baton? You said you'd given it to Craig. Is that PC Walker?
Yeah.
When had you given that to Craig?
I'd have to refer to my statement, but I believe it was around about the time when I picked up Nicole.
Was it before you picked up Nicole or after?
I don't know.
So, where were you when you gave your baton to PC Walker?
I'll have to revert to my statement now.
Right. That's your original Perk Statement 262, and
Around the same time that I was lifting or holding Nicole up, I remember Craig shouting at me, "I've not got my baton," or "Give me your baton."
can I ask you before you read that to tell us what page you're on, please?
Page 5.
Page 5. And you see the big paragraph that's sort of in the middle of the screen at the moment, a couple beneath that, or 3 or 4 beneath that. So you see, around the same time that I was lifting or holding Nicole up. Yeah? Do you want to read that out? I remember Craig shouting at me.
Around the same time I was lifting or holding Nicole up, I remember Craig shouted at me, "I've not got my baton," or "Give me your baton." I removed my baton from my vest, and I'm not sure, and I threw it at him or in his direction. I cannot remember whether I had extended the baton or not.
Thank you. And where were you and PC Walker when that was going on?
At the point that Nicole was getting picked up at.
Right. So in the road in Hayfield Road?
Yeah.
Thank you. And is that why you provided him with your baton? Do you remember why he said, "I've no got my baton"?
His clip or something was broken.
Is that something you knew at the time or something that you've heard evidence about?
No, I'd heard them talking about it beforehand, but on a Sunday, in fact, Saturday or Sunday, the clothing store wouldn't be open, so you wouldn't get a new clip.
Right. So when you say you'd heard him talking about it before, was that prior to the 3rd of May?
Yeah.
Right. And you've been describing using the baton over, you said you didn't remember if it was extended, but you put it across Mr. Bio's left bicep.
By that time it was extended.
Yeah. So by that time it had been extended, either by you or someone else, and you put it over Mr. Bio's left bicep.
Yeah.
And was this a recognised technique to control someone's upper arm?
There are all sorts of techniques that batons can be used for a lot of them kind of are used for, like, say, levers and, you know, things like that. Whether it's an actual recognised technique, you'd have to get a officer safety expert to speak to that. But bottom line is, when the shit hits the fan, you use anything that's available to you.
Right. I'm conscious of the time. It may be, yes.
Take a break for 20 minutes.
Thank you.
First tape, is that right? Well, we'll take a break now for 15 minutes here in order to try and make progress through the tapes. Right, Miss Wildgoose, when you're ready. Yes, Miss Graham.
Thank you. Mr. Paton, we found a third baton I'd like you to have a look at. Could we maybe have all three in front of you? Now, it may be that this is the baton more like the one you used, I don't know. Can you pick up the third one, the one I didn't show you before the break? There's the two ribbed ones, yeah. Does it look
I don't know. One could be either one. I'm not sure what one it was.
Could be either.
That's basically just got a butt end on it.
Yeah.
Don't know.
And you said it was extended. Can you extend it and maybe try and show us what it was you were doing with the baton? Try and...
So,
Right. So you've extended that baton. Is that the smooth one?
Mhm.
That's like your baton. And you're holding it. Can you hold up so that the chair and the assessors can see it? And you said that you put it across his left bicep. So is that how you were holding it when you put it across his left bicep?
yeah.
Was it on the inside of his arm or was it on the outside of his arm?
Don't know. Probably both.
Both.
Because his arm was moving about, so probably both.
Oh, I see. So you're moving from the elbow, moving your fist sort of backwards and forwards there. So is that how he was moving his left arm?
What I recall,
And so did you have the baton held, as you just demonstrated, above the elbow area?
across there.
Right.
My theory was that if you've got control from this point, then the bottom half of your arm isn't going anywhere. It's not going to be able to get a knife. It's not going to be able to punch out any further because you've got it pinned on the ground. And it allows the other cops to get a secondary bracelet on.
So the other officers can put a handcuff on his wrist because that's
Well,
free.
what I said at one point was I says link the cuffs. As it turned out, they didn't link the cuffs, but quite often for a guy that's muscle bound, which by the way wasn't far short of, you can put a set of cuffs on one hand, a set of cuffs on the other hand, and then link the two, so you're actually wearing two sets of cuffs.
And why is that appropriate for someone who's muscle bound?
Because it's so that it's more so to the back, to be honest, just so that if you're muscle bound, it's difficult to get your arms close enough.
And can that also be the case if you're handcuffed to the front if you're muscle bound?
But in situations like that, the cuffs just go on any way you can get the cuffs on. Yes, ideally they would be stacked or to the rear, palm to palm or whatever, but in fluid situations like that, where somebody's aggressively fighting out and resisting, the cuffs go on any shape or form that you can get them on.
So get them on any way you can, front or back.
Yep.
But with people who are muscle bound, does it make it easier to link the cuffs sometimes?
It can be, or if you're only able to get control of one arm to get one cuff on, and then divert your attention to the other one, and then it's just like I say, linking the two.
And does that make it easier to connect the
It can
cuffs?
do, aye.
And if someone's connected or with linked cuffs to the front, does it give more space for their chest or their muscles?
Yeah.
Yeah. And but that wasn't done on this occasion.
No.
So it was one set of handcuffs.
As far as I'm aware, one set, yeah.
And you've talked about him aggressively fighting and resisting. Can you describe to us how he was moving when he was on the ground?
Just wriggling all over the place, and his arms were sort of flaring and his legs were flaring, and it's the best I can describe.
How hard was he resisting?
He was resisting, considering the size of the guys that were trying to stop him resisting. He was resisting a fair bit.
Who were the guys that were trying to stop him resisting?
Craig, Ashley, myself. I think the rest of them sort of came and offered their bit after that.
So initially, you, PC Walker and PC Tomlinson. And we've heard that you and PC Walker are 6'4".
Yeah,
And we've heard that PC Walker was 25 stone at the time. And you were 17?
about that, yeah.
And tell me, when this was going on, where was PC Walker?
My recollection, as I say, I put myself on the opposite side of Bayou, as shown in the photographs. I put myself on his left-hand side, where the photographs put me being on his right-hand side. So from where I was, Craig was on the opposite side of the body, therefore on the right-hand side, and he was slightly to my left-hand side. The reason I know that is because I was wiping my eyes on his t-shirt to try and get some sight back.
I'll go through that again if that's okay, so I completely understand what you're saying. So from your position, you've told us that you were to the top half of Mr. Bio and you're using the baton in relation to his arm. So from your position, where was PC Walker?
Across the body from me and slightly to my left-hand side.
So across the body, slightly to your left. And you've said that you were wiping your eyes. Were your eyes still bothering you?
I couldn't see, yeah.
So your eyes are still bothering you and you're wiping your eyes on his t-shirt, did you see? What part of PC Walker's t-shirt?
His sort of shoulder back of his arm.
So you're gesturing there to your left side. It was at PC Walker's left side or his left arm that you were using.
I believe so.
Did that help with your eyes?
No, really. The only thing that really helps is with CSP is if you force your eyes open into the wind. But I obviously didn't have that opportunity.
Right. So, PC Walker's on the other side of Mr. Bio to you. What was he doing when you were using the baton on Mr. Bio's arm?
I can't recall.
Do you remember what position was PC Walker in?
He was on his side, but I can't be specific about what position he was in.
When you say he was on his side, do you mean PC Walker?
Yeah.
Which side was he on?
See, I'm wary about saying and committing to what side but what was actually going on here, because I know that my recollection is possibly wrong, I believe that Craig was on his left-hand side.
Well, don't you worry about being wrong, because the chair, you've said that to the chair now, he can take that into account. So you think PC Walker was on his left-hand side. And where in relation to Mr. Bio was PC Walker? You've said he was lying on his left. Where was he in relation to Mr. Bio?
I couldn't say for certain.
Do you remember where his legs were, PC Walker's legs?
Kind of out to the side,
Right.
down. What would be down Bio's right-hand side?
Okay. And was he lying on Mr. Bio?
No,
Where was he lying?
he was lying alongside him.
Right. And how was he positioned then in relation to Mr. Bio? You said he wasn't lying on him, but how was he positioned? I'm interested in whether Miss PC Walker, during the restraint, was using some
I know
of his...
what you're getting at. You're getting to see if he was lying across his chest or that, but he wasn't.
Right. Was he using any of his weight on Mr. Bio?
Probably a certain degree, yeah.
Can you give us any assistance by helping? Tell us when you say a certain degree, what do you mean?
No.
No. Can you tell us what weight, if any, you were using to try and restrain Mr. Bio?
I was putting pretty much my full weight on his bicep.
And describe to us what PC Tomlinson was doing.
Don't know.
Where was he?
Couldn't be certain. I think he was to my left-hand side.
Doing what?
Kind of, don't know.
Do you have any recollection now of what position he was in? No. What sort of force were the other two officers using, if you remember? Let's start with PC Walker.
I was completely disorientated and out of it. I don't know if you've had CS spray or that sprayed,
No.
but it just completely wipes you out of the game. You can't hear, you can't see. You've just absolutely no sense of your bearings or anything like that. There's panic going through you because it's hurting. The more you touch your eyes, the more it hurts. But your brain's telling you to try and get it out your eyes. So it's just a complete. It's horrible, isn't it? My recollection at that point is very, very mixed and very, very vague.
Can I ask one other question about this point in the restraint? You've talked about using PC Walker's T-shirt to wipe your eyes, and you said the left. You've also talked about your recollection being that he was on his left side. Can you explain to me what part of his T-shirt you were using?
The back of his sleeve. It would be a T-shirt he was wearing now. So the back of his sleeve.
Did you lean over?
Just kind of went like that.
Right. So you leant over Mr. Bio to get to PC Walker's back of his sleeve.
Aye.
Thank you. And then you mentioned some others arriving. Do you remember who the other officers were?
I don't remember them arriving.
Right.
I remember others being there. What stage they came, I don't know.
Who were the others that you remember?
Danny Gibson was there, James McDonough was there, Kayleigh Good was there, Scott Maxwell was there, Derek Connell was seen there, and Sammy Davidson.
Do you remember PC Smith?
Al Smith was there.
Alan Smith. When they were there, let's start with PC Smith. Do you remember what he did?
Not really. I didn't really have any knowledge of what he was doing or sort of any interaction with him until it came to try to save Bayou's life during the CPR.
I'll come on to that. What about PC Gibson?
Nah, I know now from obviously watching the inquiry, but at the time I wasn't aware of what Danny was doing.
PC McDonough?
No.
What about PC Good?
No.
Acting Police Sergeant Maxwell?
Acting Police Sergeant Maxwell was kind of over my right hand shoulder from what I recall, and he was just really passing back messages on the airwave.
Could you hear those messages?
I could, aye.
And then you mentioned DS Davidson, Samantha Davidson. What was she doing when you saw her?
I don't know. I just became aware that she was kind of floating about for various parts. I think one part she was kind of near Scott Maxwell, but then the next part she was in the middle of the road. I didn't know what she was doing.
Right. And you mentioned DC Connell.
Yeah.
What was DC Connell doing?
Well, we now know what he was doing, but he was kind of across at the grassy area.
What's your recollection on the day of what his involvement was? Did you have a recollection?
I believed he was looking for a knife.
Right. We've heard that at one point PC Tomlinson pressed his emergency button. Were you aware of that?
No.
You didn't hear anything like that on the radio?
No.
And we are also aware, we've heard evidence from PC Smith that at one point he made a transmission saying one officer's been punched to the back of the head, no obvious serious injuries, male secure on ground. Do you remember that transmission?
I think I have a vague recollection of that.
What were you doing at that time?
I don't know.
So tell us about the handcuffs. You've mentioned what you were trying to achieve with your...
I didn't touch any handcuffs.
No. So didn't touch your handcuffs at all?
No.
Were you aware whether the handcuffs were applied to Mr. Bio?
I knew they were applied to him. At what stage I became aware, I don't know.
Do you know whose handcuffs were used?
No.
Do you know who managed to secure them?
No.
And do you have any recollection of when you first realised they were on?
No. Because even when I was doing chest compressions, and as I now know the handcuffs were on, I was oblivious to the fact that the handcuffs were on, because I had no reason to. They weren't impeding the CPR in any shape or form.
Okay.
So they were kind of negligible, and it is good practice to have handcuffs on, obviously, for whether they're feigning it or come back round or whatever.
And we've also heard some evidence about leg restraints or fast straps being applied. Do you have any recollection of them being applied?
No. I was at the opposite end.
So do you remember who applied them?
No.
Or how they were applied? Or even where they were applied? And you mentioned a moment ago about feigning. What is your concern as a police officer about someone feigning or pretending or faking something?
Just to sort of push into a false sense of security, thinking that they are unconscious, everybody will back off and then they'll spring up. And whilst there's a knife unaccounted for, you can't take that chance. So the best thing for them is to be in handcuffs.
Is that something that you've experienced, you know, prior to May 2015?
Feigning.
Pretending?
Yeah.
And was that something on the day that you were concerned about, or is it just something you've heard about since we've been starting our evidence?
It was a concern on the day. Aye.
When did that become a concern on the day?
I don't know. I like to have people in handcuffs as long as they need to be in my handcuffs.
Right. And how long do you think people need to be in handcuffs?
Well, I certainly think that he needed to be in handcuffs until pretty much the end of CPR. I don't think the handcuffs. I watched a doctor's witness, a doctor's evidence the other day there, and she's kind of implied that if you're in handcuffs, it's making the chest area a smaller target for doing CPR. That's nonsense. If you're in handcuffs, palm to palm, it's actually forcing a bigger area there. There was no him being handcuffed during CPR, and I done the compressions, caused no problem whatsoever to it. I was perfectly happy that it was effective.
Right. So, why did you think the handcuffs should be on until the end of CPR?
Because they weren't impacting on CPR.
So, did you consider taking them off at any
No,
time?
I didn't, but I didn't put them on.
Right.
You know.
And we've heard that there's sort of generic keys that can be used. Yeah. So you did have a key.
Did have a key.
But you didn't consider at any point taking them off.
No.
So just to go back slightly, we've gone on to CPR, but I'm interested in, you've talked about using your baton and you've talked about the other officers being involved. Did you have an impression at the time of how long the restraint was going on for?
Everything seems faster in a dynamic situation. It seems longer, should I say, in a dynamic situation. The restraint didn't go on for particularly long.
Okay. When did you first notice that Mr. Bio had stopped moving?
Can't remember.
Do you remember what you were doing yourself when he stopped moving?
No, I don't know.
Do you have any recollection of what other people were doing when they first realised that Mr. Bio had stopped moving?
No.
We've heard some evidence that when he was turned onto his left-hand side, certain officers realised he'd stopped moving at that point. Do you have any comment about that?
I don't recall him being on his left-hand side. Whether, again, because I was disorientated at that.
Right.
My position is, it's most likely wrong, my position is that he was on his back at all times. I was dealing with him.
So, am I right in saying you remember him moving when you were using the baton on his arm,
Yeah.
but you don't remember when he stopped moving?
No.
So let's have a quick look at the spreadsheet, because I want to ask you about a particular period. The chair's heard evidence about from 7:25 and 17 seconds. And this is, I think, on page 7 of the spreadsheet. So if you go to page 7, and you'll see an entry there at 7:25 and 17. It's an airwaves transmission from PC Alan Smith. It's about halfway down the page. And he says, this male now certainly appears to be unconscious, breathing, not responsive, get an ambulance for him. So we've heard that by the time of this airwaves transmission, that PC Smith was aware that Mr. Bile was unconscious, but he was breathing at that time. And then if we look at 7:29:30, so this is at the top of page 11. And you'll see at the top, again, there's an airways transmission, 7:29:30. Just the third one down. Acting Police Sergeant Scott Maxwell says, Control, can you get a move on with the ambulance? This accused is now not breathing. CPR is commencing. Do you see that one?
Yeah.
I'm interested in this period of time between Mr. Bile being noticed to be unconscious but not breathing, 7:25:17, and then 7:29:30, not breathing, and CPR commencing. So that's a period of just over 4 minutes. And it would be very helpful if you could say what was happening during this time.
Can't recall.
Don't remember.
No.
Do you remember the message from PC Smith coming over the airwaves transmission that Mr. Bile was unconscious but breathing?
I believe so. Aye.
Where were you when you heard that message?
Still in the vicinity of where Bayou was lying.
So still in the vicinity. Where in the vicinity?
Don't know.
Do you remember who else was around
I
at that
didn't.
time?
I didn't really move from the head end,
Right.
but apparently I stood up at some point, but I can't recall that.
Right. Do you remember PC Smith being near you at some point?
Yeah.
What was he doing?
Alan was pretty much taking control of the situation.
How was he taking control?
Well, obviously he's sort of aware that he's our OST trainer and he's got a background in military, etc. He's the most methodical cop I think I've worked with. He was, if he says something's needing done, there'll be a good reason for it getting done.
So you've talked about you're at the head end. PC Smith is in the vicinity of you at that stage. What was he doing when he was at the head end?
When who was at the head end?
PC Smith.
Well, I don't know if I'm jumping ahead of myself, but I took a valve, a face valve out, and I was trying to get the face valve into Bayou's mouth, but his teeth were gritted shut. So I tried the best by putting my fingers in, pulling it open. That probably accounts for quite a lot of the scratches and what have you around about the boy's gums. I couldn't get it to go in. Done the best we could. Alan tried to get a couple of breaths in, but it was just leaking around the sides. And then he was getting contaminated, so he decided just to go to compressions without rescue breaths.
Okay. Right, let's think about that for a moment. This is at the point you're going to be giving CPR. And we've heard about a valve that's used. Was that your valve?
Yeah.
And did you have that in your uniform?
Yeah.
And was it at that point that PC Smith came to the head area?
Yeah.
Had he been at the head area prior to that point?
I don't think so. I think he was more down the sort of waist area.
Right. And we may have heard some evidence that he was at the legs at one
Well,
stage.
Aye.
Okay. And tell us about the difficulties with the use of the valve. You've talked about Mr. Bio's jaw being gritted shut, I think you said. Tell us about that.
Teeth were gritted shut. Couldn't get the valve to go in.
And did you try to get the valve in?
Yes.
And you mentioned Mr. Bio's face or his mouth. How did you try to get the valve in?
Just by putting your fingers in and try to pull down his jaw, or
Right.
pull just to separate his two teeth.
Right. When you put your fingers in, were you trying to get them between his teeth or just at the lip area?
No, try to get between his teeth. You've obviously got to be cautious of that because they could bite your fingers off. But it was a panic situation. Do what's required and kind of hope for the best.
We've heard from PC Smith that at the point CPR started, Mr. Bio wasn't breathing. But did it remain a concern for you that he could bite your fingers?
Conscious of it, yeah.
And how long did you try to get between his teeth?
Ten, 15 seconds.
Have you been taught how to do that as
Yeah.
part of first aid training?
Yeah.
And you've explained you weren't able to do that.
No.
And you think it may have caused some issues on Mr. Bio round his mouth?
It could have done.
Could have done. So once you stopped making that attempt, what did PC Smith do?
Just discarded the bag and the valve.
Had he tried to use the valve?
Yes.
So how had you been able to use the valve before it was discarded?
Just by putting it on in the lips, but not beyond the teeth.
Right.
But you'll not get a proper seal around the valve doing that.
And is that what actually happened? You couldn't get a proper
Aye.
seal?
Aye.
And in not getting a proper seal, what were you were trying to describe what happened?
You're trying to get breaths in, but the breaths are just coming out the side.
Leaking out the side of the mouth. And was there mucus?
Yeah.
And so after PC Smith discarded that, what happened then?
The decision was made the decision was made by Alan Smith just to go to compressions. Craig Walker identified that he would be doing the compressions. Just before that, actually, when we were trying to get the valve in, I had put my hand under Bio's head and just run my hand around his head to see if there was any swelling or bleeding or anything like that, and there wasn't. And then, as I say, the breaths weren't successful. They were going to compressions only, and Craig took over doing the compressions.
Right. Why were you looking for swelling or bleeding on his head, Mr. Bio's head?
I believe at that point Ashley had said that he had struck him with a baton.
So PC Tomlinson made you aware he'd struck him to
Yeah.
the head. And you couldn't find anything
No.
in relation to bleeding or swelling?
No. Sure there's a wee nick above his ear, but neither here nor there sort of thing.
And you're pointing to your right, just above your right ear.
I could be left or right.
Okay. Where was PC Walker when he started the compressions?
On the hospital side of the body.
And we've heard that if we were looking at those images again, do you remember image 5? The roundabout was on the left and the hospital is on the right, we've heard.
So it'd be on the right hand side of the picture.
The right hand
pictures.
side. Okay. And what position was he in when he started the compressions? PC Walker.
On his knees.
On his knees. And where was PC Smith at that point?
I think he was standing up, and I think he went and got water for Kevin Nelson.
Okay. Do you remember that, or was that something you've heard?
I remember seeing him standing getting water from a neighbour.
Right. You wouldn't have at that time have known it was Kevin
No.
Nelson. Okay. So just before we leave this, can I go back again? You've talked about the CPR and what was going on at that stage. That happened after Mr. Bio stopped breathing. But in the period between Mr. Bio stopping moving and PC Smith noting that he was unconscious, but before he noticed that he wasn't breathing, during that period, do you remember what was happening during that point?
No.
No. How long did the CPR go on?
Over 5 minutes maybe. Craig got a shot, then I took a shot.
We've heard that it tends to be pairs. 2 people will.
It can be as many people, the more the better, because it is tiring.
Okay. At some point, when Mr. Bio was on the ground, we've heard evidence that you may have patted or tapped or slapped Mr. Bio's face. Do you want to say anything about that?
Aye. What I will say about that is, it's not as it was first betrayed by yourself, that was a slap. It was 2 parts, like that. Nothing more than that. So, the whole, maybe I put it down in my statement as a slap. It was no slap.
Okay. And you've demonstrated what it was you were doing.
It was done with the best intention to get a reaction from him.
And was there any reaction?
No.
And we've also heard that PC Smith used his knuckles.
I can't remember him doing that, but that's another
Okay.
recognised technique.
And the technique you used, is that a recognised technique?
I don't believe so, but you'll have to watch any medical programme on the telly and they use it.
Okay. And do you remember, you've tapped your right cheek, do you remember which of Mr. Bio's cheeks you tapped?
Left cheek, I think.
His left cheek.
Yeah.
And which of your hands did you
My right
use?
hand.
Your right hand. Do you remember one or more people checking Mr. Bio's pulse?
No.
Did you remain at the sort of top end of Mr. Bio during the whole time CPR was performed?
No.
What did you do?
I went round onto the right hand side to do compressions.
Right. So you moved in order to pair up with Craig Walker, who was doing compressions. And did that continue until the ambulance arrived?
Yes.
Once the ambulance arrived, what did you do?
I gave them a brief handover as to what had happened. Can't remember what I said to them, and then left it in their capable hands, and I went back to the police van.
When you gave the ambulance personnel the handover, what were you trying to do? And what is a handover?
You're telling them what's a history, if you like, what you've noticed in the way injuries or response or anything like that, what's been done. Have you got an identity for the person? A knife's not been recovered, things like that. But didn't ask me to be specific about how I worded it, but it'd be information like that.
And why are you giving the ambulance personnel a handover?
Because the bio would then be getting placed into their care, and then they would do a handover at the hospital end.
Right. Can I ask you about your Perk statement? You've talked about the first statement you gave to Perk, and you've made a couple of references to it, but I'd like to go through that with you in a little bit more detail so we make sure we haven't missed anything. And if we could look at, first of all, I think page 4 from paragraph 2. So this is the part of your statement where I took you to this at the beginning, Mr. Paton, where you talk about arriving and being the first police vehicle at the scene. You see that in the second paragraph? And then it says, I could clearly see a large black male in the street in front of me. He was wearing a light-coloured t-shirt. I remember the t-shirt being tight-fitting around his shoulders and biceps. He was standing in the road which takes you to Victoria Hospital. He was near to the bus stop in the path which leads to Henry Road. And I think that's what you've told us already today. And then you say he was facing me. He was walking towards me with his arms at his sides, with his palms facing forwards. There was no knife in his hands. I did not see any knife about his body at that point. And I think you've told us today, in fact, you didn't ever see a knife on Mr. Bio. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Then can we go further up, please? Craig stopped the vehicle on the road at an angle. Probably just before the vehicle stopped, I was getting out of the vehicle. Craig parked the nose of the vehicle towards the curbside. His door would have been closer to the man. So just to look at that paragraph briefly, you said probably just before the vehicle stopped, I was getting out of the vehicle.
Yeah.
So you didn't actually wait until the transit van had stopped in the bus stop before you were getting out.
Splitting hairs there, eh?
That was what you said to Perk originally. Do you think that's right, or do you want to, is your recollection different?
It would have either stopped or it was immediately about to stop.
Right. So it would have slowed down almost to a stop if it wasn't at a stop. And then you say Craig parked the nose of the vehicle towards the curbside. His door would have been closer to the man. I think you've given us an indication on the 3D image where Mr. Bio was at that time. Are you still happy with that now that you see it? Straight away I remembered that there had been a rumour going about Kirkcaldy Police Station that somebody intended to cause harm to a female cop. Numerous officers had asked managers to confirm if there was any known truth in the rumour, but this had never been confirmed to my knowledge. The rumour still remains strong, and it is believed by the officers that this had contributed to all officers in Kirkcaldy being double crewed whilst on patrol. For a number of months, checks have also been getting carried out by officers at a number of identified locations in Kirkcaldy due to increased terrorist risk. It also ran through my mind that this man could be part of a terrorist plot. And is that really what you've told us already today?
Yeah.
Now, earlier you mentioned harm by a lone wolf, so a threat to a female officer by a lone wolf. There's no mention of that here, but is that your recollection now, today, that it was by a lone wolf?
Yes.
And you mentioned there numerous officers had asked managers to confirm if there was any known truth in the rumour. Do you remember who any of those officers were?
No.
All right, thank you. But it ran through your mind that this could be part of a terrorist plot. Was that something that ran through your mind with all knife incidents?
Yes.
Whether the person was black or white?
Made no difference whatsoever.
Then looking at, I was straight out of the passenger side door of the van and I immediately took my CS spray out of my vest. I continued to think that he may still have been in possession of a knife and I wasn't taking any risks. As I have already said, I was still conscious of the fact that just because I could see his palms, he might still have the knife in his waistband or secreted somewhere else about his person. With my spray in my right hand and pointing in the direction of the man, I shouted loudly and very clearly, "Get down on the ground." The guy was walking towards me and completely ignored me. He kept walking towards me with his palms out, and I remember thinking how crazy he looked and as if he was on a mission. I was in genuine fear for my life, and at this point I pressed my red emergency button and shouted loudly and clearly, "Get down on the fucking ground." My shouting and my pointing of my spray had absolutely no bearing on him, and he kept walking towards me, ignoring me, as if he was in a one-track mind. I was terrified and thought I was going to get attacked by him. Now I'd like to ask you some questions about that paragraph. You've told us today about your spray and shouting the commands. Now earlier today you talked about communication, and I'm interested, you also say in your inquiry statement you'd been trained in de-escalation procedures, and I'm quite interested in finding out, there's no mention there of communication in the sense of a conversation or
Wasn't
questions.
time for a conversation.
Right. So you felt there wasn't time for that?
It wasn't the time or the situation for a conversation.
Oh, sorry, it wasn't the time.
Yeah.
Right. And that's because of the circumstances you've told us about earlier?
Yes.
So you didn't think there was time to ask him any questions like, "Are you okay?" or anything like that?
It's not the situation for asking
Okay.
questions like that. The man was out of control. The man was drugged up. The man had a big knife. He was using it. He was attacking cars. I needed firm control from the word go. And then once he's in cuffs, then ask him if he's wanted a cup of tea or that. But no at that stage.
All right. So what sort of situation would you be expecting that would allow you to carry out that type of communication with someone in advance? What would the circumstances be that would allow you to engage in that way with someone?
Yeah. I think you've got a copy of a PDR, very similar sort of circumstances.
We do, and I'll come on to that later actually, or your
Right.
your QC will do that.
And that was a situation, knife, mental health issue, negotiation, taking control of a situation, engaging in further conversation, and it coming to a resolution. So that's the sort of situation that that it could be used in. Even calls like domestics and things like that, separating partners and speaking to one, speaking to another, coming to a resolution. But this incident in Hayfield Road was completely non-textbook. It's a situation that you do not train for. It's a situation that there was not enough resources, and it was only able to be dealt with by a clear, concise command. If he chose to ignore that or those commands, then so be it.
Right. Let me go through some of that with you. So you said it's non-textbook, you're not trained for this. What was different about this situation that meant you'd not ever been trained to handle that?
CS and PAVA and not working, completely disengaging with you. At that time, 2 years dealing with it as well. It's certainly not a scenario that I've been involved in during officer safety training in my 14 years.
Okay. So you've not had officer safety training about a situation where CS doesn't work on the person?
I don't believe so.
And you weren't aware that CS spray sometimes doesn't work on a person?
Yeah, I was aware it sometimes doesn't work, but you've just got to put your faith in it. But I thought between CS and PAVA that there was a good chance that at least one of them would have worked.
And did you know that PC Walker had PAVA?
Yeah, it's
And
got a
you've-
red top on it, where mine has a grey top on it.
And you had CS spray?
Yeah,
But neither worked?
no,
That was a surprise to you.
yeah.
And then complete disengagement. Are you talking about not getting a reaction from Mr. Bio?
Yeah.
Is that a situation you'd ever been trained in?
Yeah, you get training to that effect, that they just continue walking towards you, or what have you. That's where you're doing things like discharging your CS. So CS is the weapon of choice, as far as I'm concerned.
We heard evidence from PC Walker that it was his go-to.
Same idea.
Same for you.
Yeah.
And is that something that you'd sort of immediately reach for?
I would reach for it before my bat and put it that way.
Right. And how much importance do you place on communication as a skill, as a tactic to de-escalate a situation?
Well, I did try and communicate, but you've got to have it from the other side. If he's not engaging back with you, if he's not even telling you to fuck off, or you can, it wasn't me, boss, or you can, I'm just on my way home, or anything, but to absolutely say nothing at all, I'm trying to engage with him, he's not engaging with me. There's only so much you can do.
And your attempts at communicating with him were the commands that you talked about earlier?
Yes.
And there was no response from Mr. Bio
No.
in relation to those? And that was either verbal or in his reaction, the way he reacted?
Or pointing to the ground.
Yeah.
There's the police van's got flashing lights. There's other cars coming with flashing lights and sirens, more police officers. He knew, or he should have known, a situation was going on, and more than likely it was because of his conduct for stabbing cars beforehand. He knew he was wanting to be, the police were wanting to speak to him for something, but he chose to continue walking, and not just avoid my commands and avoid Nicole's commands and avoid Ashley's commands.
So
I can only describe him as being a zombie on that morning.
So there were a lot of cues visually, what he could see, but also things that he would or should have been able to hear. Did you have concerns at that point that he simply wasn't hearing, or that he had difficulties with communicating? He may have had difficulty speaking English. Did you consider any of that as a possibility?
For somebody that doesn't speak a language, the first words that they learn are swear words. If somebody's pointing to the ground saying, "Get down on the fucking ground," you know that that's what they're trying to tell you.
You've mentioned the word zombie there. Can you explain what you mean when you use that word?
Just on a one-track mind, just staring through people, goggle-eyed, oblivious to everything else that's going on around about him. Consistent with being on flacker.
Is that a word that you would use for white people as well as black?
Why would I know?
Okay. Did you consider that this could be a mental health situation? He was having a mental health crisis?
Yeah, definitely.
And when did that thought go through your mind?
Thought went through my mind at the same time that I thought that it could be a terrorism attack. As soon as I'm going towards that call, it's quarter of a mile away from Whiteman's Brae Hospital. Could be somebody escaped from there. Yeah, totally consider it to be a medical matter.
And so,
But that doesn't change things for whether somebody's on a medical matter or not. That doesn't change things when somebody's using a big knife to stab out at cars, kick cars, and things like this. You've still got to deal with it promptly, with clear and concise comments.
So knowing that he had, or he was suspected of having used a knife prior to your arrival, knowing that, was that the priority, or was that the main factor for you when you were deciding what tactic or what option to adopt?
My main priority was to intervene before he ended up stabbing a member of the public.
Right. And that was your priority, regardless of the fact he didn't have a knife on him when you arrived?
No, because he could have had a knife, quite easily could have had a knife. Or could have gone to where he'd planted the knife and then caused damage.
Okay. So, on the way, you considered it was perhaps a mental health issue. When you arrived, you've talked about his eyes and thinking he was high on flaca or on a substance, under the influence, if we like. At any point did you consider stepping back and transmitting to ACR or to the other officers and asking for an ambulance or medical support?
Somebody's walking towards you, they're walking faster than what you are walking backwards. I did try and maintain a gap. If I'd walked any further back, I would have been in the bushes.
Okay. So did you consider calling for an ambulance or stepping back and keeping out of his way?
No, it happened too fast.
Too fast. And you said that we've talked about the training. You didn't feel you had adequate training to deal with this situation. You also said not resource. You didn't have the resources.
Yeah.
What resources do you think would have helped with this situation?
An ARV.
And
If not in Garcodia, at least at Glenrothes.
if you'd had confirmation that an ARV was on its way from Glenrothes, what other options would that have given you?
To stand back, to muster somewhere, and for them to go in.
So,
What would have also been a benefit, and we wouldn't have been here today, and wouldn't be £9.5 million down, would be if officers had body-worn cameras, and if there was cameras in the vans.
so that you think would have assisted with the situation if there'd been body-worn cameras?
Well, there was cameras in the vans, but for whatever reason they got taken out.
You say for whatever reason. Do you have any idea? Was this before the 3rd of May 2015?
Yeah.
And you've mentioned the ARV. We've heard that at that time ARV officers had tasers as well, but that's not something officers have now. Not something a constable or a response team had.
I'm led to believe that there are certain officers carry tasers now, whether they're on duty, I don't know what ratio they are to being on duty, but there's certain, there might have been a taser officer on, there might not have been.
But in 2015, you didn't have a taser.
I didn't have one personally, no.
And PC Walker didn't have a
No.
taser. And you've talked about an ARV from Glenrothes. How quickly could an ARV come from Glenrothes?
10 minutes, 10 minutes.
So if you'd only had to wait 10 minutes for an ARV, and that was an option available to you, is that something you would have elected to do?
Yes.
And if you'd been waiting for an ARV, you talked about muster, what would you have done? Where would you have waited?
Gallagher's car park or something like that.
Right. So a distance removed from Mr. Bile. And during that time, what would you have been doing while you waited for the ARV?
Well, if he stayed in the same position, same location, then I could keep eyes on him. If he walked off, a bit more difficult. Try to do a containment with 8 cops in a housing estate. It would be fluid. The worry there would be that he went back, which I firmly believe he was intending doing, that he went back and picked up the knife again and caused chaos.
So what would the potential risk to the public have been if you had waited 10 minutes for an ARV?
It could have been death.
And is that a risk at that time you were prepared, you would have been prepared to take if you were waiting for an ARV in the situation that
It would
presented
have to be
itself?
closely monitored.
Yeah.
It would have to be very, very closely monitored.
Is that something you would have been willing to do?
Yeah.
And when you say closely monitored, how would that demonstrate itself? How would you closely monitor something?
Well, as I say, if you parked up in Gallagher's car park and just took up a point viewing along Hayfield Road, you could establish whether he went up into the industrial estate or down into Poplar Crescent or anything like that.
So you could have kept your eyes on him?
Trust me, I've been involved in numerous containment situations in housing estates, and it's no easy. Yeah, okay. You need double the amount of police that are on that shift to do a proper textbook containment.
So you need double the amount of officers on a shift. Is that the response unit? That's what you mean when you say a shift? Right. And we've heard that there's Henry Road and there's a nearby industrial estate and different places around, is that right? Yeah. So if you had been parked and observing, what sort of feedback could you have given to the ACR if you'd done that?
Example being the male's on Hayfield Road at its junction with Poplar Crescent. He's waving a sword about in the air. Doesn't appear to be any members of the public close by.
So that's information you could have shared with ACR.
Yeah.
And we've also heard that the other officers who are en route can hear transmissions on their radios.
Yeah.
You've talked at the end of the paragraph we were just looking at, that you talked there of him having a one-track mind. What did you mean by that?
Just fixated on what he was wanting to do.
Right. And you also, just slightly above that, you talk about pressing your red emergency button.
Yeah.
And let me just take you to that on the spreadsheet. So if you turn to page 3 of the spreadsheet towards the bottom, and we'll still have the statement on the screen. But see at the bottom of page 3, it's 720.39, or just, sorry, 720.42. It says there, PC Alan Paton's emergency status is turned on. Is that when you pressed your emergency button?
That's what it says, that's what it says.
And is that what you're referring to on the paragraph on the screen? That you were in genuine fear for your life and you pressed your red emergency button and shouted loudly.
I genuinely thought I was going to die, yeah. It goes in slow motion. I had, when I was curled up, I had visions. Your sides are exposed, the back of your neck's exposed. I expected a meat cleaver or a knife in the side of the neck, and then you start to have the thoughts: am I going to get home from my shift tonight? Am I going to see my wife again? Am I going to see my kids again? And that's what still causes me problems. That's the main part of my PTSD, is that I just can't get that out of my mind.
Right. You were thinking the worst.
I was thinking the worst.
Can I ask you something about the order of events? You'll see in this paragraph you talk about shouting, "Get down on the ground," and then "Get down on the fucking ground," and you've told us about that today. But in the line above your second command there, you say, "I was in genuine fear for my life, and at this point I pressed my red emergency button and shouted loudly and clearly, 'Get down on the fucking ground.'" And then in the paragraph under that, you then talk about spraying the CS spray. And I'm just wondering if you could help the chair understand, was it after your first command and before your second command and before you discharged your spray that you pressed your red emergency button?
I don't know.
You don't remember now?
No.
The chair may have heard some evidence from PC Walker that he thought you had pressed your button after the spray was discharged. But I just wondered if you had any recollection.
No.
What do you
I think I pressed the red. I think I pressed the red button because I was. I think it probably would have been after the spray, because I pressed the red button to open up the airwave channel, because I was contaminated and struggling to see or to put out any clear messages. So I think that was where I pressed the red button.
So after you'd used the spray and become contaminated.
I think so.
And does that make more sense to you now to think that's when you would have pressed your button?
I did. I don't think I've actually used the red button before now. So it was something pretty serious, and that I pressed the red button.
So it was when you became infected with the CS spray or contaminated with it. That's the point at which you've used your button. That's when you're incapacitated.
Just to open up the airwave.
Right. And we've heard that then allows, it turns it into a sort of transmitter.
Yeah.
And so do you think maybe the order of your Perk statement, the way it's been noted down, the order is maybe slightly incorrect?
Yes.
Thank you. Bearing in mind the time.
Well, that'd be a good time to stop for lunch.
Yes.
But we're stopping at lunch at 2 o'clock, sit again. Yes, Miss Graham.
Mr. Paton, what I'm planning to do this afternoon just go through your statement that you gave to Perk, just as we've been doing before lunch. And we'll take you right through that. And then I'll come on later to some issues about race, which I need to ask you questions about, and that'll be me, okay? So if we go back to the bottom of page 4 of the statement, we'll be able to see that on the screen. And I think we were just about to move on to the final paragraph there. And you'll see it says, when he was about 10 feet away from me, I sprayed my CS spray towards the boy's face. Some of the spray hit him in the face, but the wind on that day was blowing on that day from the direction of the hospital to us. Most of my spray was blowing back to hit my face, so I thought there was not much point to carry on discharging my CS. Now, I think you told us earlier when you were standing on Hayfield Road, you pointed out on the image where you were standing and where Mr. Bio was standing. And I think from that image, Mr. Bio was closer to the hospital area than you.
Yeah.
So if the wind was blowing from the hospital direction, was it blowing in your face?
Yeah.
And so most of the spray blew back and hit you in the face. Yeah, you told us that earlier.
Yeah.
And then if we move on to page 5, at that point Craig, PC Walker, had come out of the van and had come round to the front of the van. It would be pretty much side on with the boy on the boy's left side. Craig also had his spray out. I remember seeing it was Pava. It had the red top on it, and Craig also discharged it towards the boy's face. Some of it hit the boy, but some of it blew into my face. I remember Craig shouting something like, "It's no fucking working," or "It's having no effect." The boy continued to walk towards me with his palms open, facing me. He was smiling at Craig and wiped the CS spray off his face. First of all, can I ask you about your use of the word boy there, or the boy's face? Is that a word that you use for white people as well as black people, people being men? Or is it just specifically in relation to Mr. Bio? The word boy. Do you use that as
Do I use it for black or white?
Yes, does it make any difference to you if it's a white person that you're referring to or a black person?
No.
So that you also in your state coloured sprays, and you say that Craig PC Walker had discharged his spray. He had Pava. Some of it hit the boy, but some of it blew into my face. So not only did you have CS spray in your face, did you also have Pava spray in your face?
Yeah.
Do you remember that now, seeing that paragraph, that you also had Pava? Where were you when the Pava spray hit you?
Side of the van.
At the same passenger side area of Hayfield Road. Thanks. And you then say, as far as I'm aware, we were still the only police vehicle there at that point. At no point hear the boy say a single thing. So at no point did you hear Mr. Bio speak. And then looking at the next paragraph, with the effect of Pava and CS on me, I could not keep my eyes clear and I was very vulnerable. I went to the back of the police van. I basically curled up, braced myself. I was probably rubbing my eyes. I was expecting to feel pain of some sort. It felt like slow motion. But I felt that I would get plunged, stabbed or struck to the head. That's what was going through my head. I kept thinking about the Lee Rigby boy, the soldier who was killed. That's what was in my head. I must have been at the back of the van for seconds. I did not actually get touched at all by the guy. I could not see at this point. I was not aware of anyone else's arrival. I heard Nicole screaming behind me. She was between the van and Henry Road. I was not aware of any of the police vehicles arriving. My eyes were still streaming at that point. I tried to open my eyes. I could see Nicole trying to get up to her feet. Every time she tried to get up, she fell down. I went over and lifted her up. She was hysterical. She was standing up, but I was holding her lapels. When she was able to stand on her own, I told her to go and sit in my van. I think she made her own way over there. And that's what you've been telling us today. And then I passed a message over the airwave that an officer had been injured and that more units were required. Can I ask you about that message that you passed over the airwave? Now, we see at 7:21:02, so if you look at page 4, please. You'll see that there was an airwave at 7:21:02. It says PC Alan Paton, and it says officers injured, PC short, male. And was that you that said that?
I think so.
I think so. So if you look at the bottom of page 3, so this is just before that message, you'll see that your PC Alan Paton's emergency status is turned on. So your status is turned on at 7:20:42. There's that airwaves transmission at 7:21:02. Did you make any other transmissions after that? Because you mention on this statement you passed a message that an officer had been injured and that more units were required. So I can see the officer injured bit. I don't see anything about more units being required.
Again, the confusion, being incapacitated, you maybe haven't got your finger fully on the button,
Right.
and so it wouldn't transmit. Could also, your mind can tell you you're saying something, but in reality, you've not said something. So again, it's just all coming down to the confusion.
So it's possible that the officer injured PC short male is the only part of that transmission that actually recorded or transmitted.
I don't understand the male. Male to me doesn't really mean anything. I think I've been trying to transmit a further sentence, perhaps beginning with the word male, but then my fingers come off the button, and so it's not transferred the rest of it.
So it could have cut that
Yeah.
off short. Thank you. You then say on the statement, at this point I could not see where the guy was or what units had attended. I was completely disorientated. And is really that what you've been telling us earlier today? You were completely disorientated. And then as I started to keep my something open a bit more, I became aware of Craig and other officers struggling on the ground with the guy on the opposite carriageway. So is there a word missing from that? Should it be eyes open?
Where is this?
It's at the bottom of the screen. As I started to keep my something open a bit more, I became aware of Craig and other officers struggling on the ground with the guy on the opposite carriageway.
Must be eyes.
It was your eyes. The carriageway in Gallagher's direction. I was still struggling and I made my way over to Craig and the other officers on the ground. And again, that's what you've been telling us today. Let's go down the page, please. Around the same time that I was lifting or holding Nicole up, I remember Craig shouting at me, "I've no got my baton," or "Gimme your baton." I removed my baton from my vest, and I'm not sure that I threw it at him or in his direction. I cannot remember whether it had extended the baton or not. So can I ask you, you told us earlier about giving PC Walker your baton. You said your baton was on your left side, is that right?
Yeah.
And you say you either threw it at him or in his direction. And we may have heard from PC Walker that you drew your baton and handed it to him. Would you disagree with that?
No, I gave him it, but whether it be a throw, whether it be handing, he got it somehow.
Right. And that was when you were lifting or holding Nicole up, you've told us, by the lapels. And that was when you were in Hayfield Road. Thank you. And you say there, I cannot remember whether I had extended the baton or not. You said earlier, you mentioned the baton being extended when you were using it in the restraint. Do you remember now whether you'd extended the baton when you handed it to...
No.
No. I genuinely don't know how many police officers were there. I remember Craig at the top end of the boy's body. The boy was face up. He was always lying on his back, face up. Craig was lying on his left-hand side, facing the boy's feet. Craig was lying across the chest of the boy. Do you remember that now, seeing that written there? Craig was lying across the chest of the boy.
I don't remember it now, if that's what it says in that statement, which was obviously closer to the time, then that's what I must have said in it.
And that would have been the truth, that would have been your more accurate record.
I will stop there and sit again at 2 o'clock.